Okay, so we will start at Ayat number 183, Surah Baqarah. So if you would like to turn to that ayah, we will begin there. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون أيام معدودات فمن كان منكم مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر وعلى الذين يطيقونه ففدية طعام مسكين ومن تطوع خيرا فهو خير له وأن تصوموا خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصمه ومن كان مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر ولتكملوا العدة ولتكبروا الله على ما هداكم ولعلكم تشكرون. Okay, so this is the discussion, or this discussion rather, is of course fasting, and particularly the fasting in the month of Ramadan. So we have in the beginning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that this is a prescription, meaning it is an obligation upon us to fast. And of course most of the exegesis or the tafsir of Quran says that as-siyam here is referring to the fast of Ramadan, because there is no other fast that is obligatory except for the fast of another or an oath that a person takes that is specified. So what that means is if a person wants something to happen in their life, they want something done from the side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they say that, oh Allah, if you do this or do that, then I will fast on such and such a day. Okay, so for instance, it could be something of a worldly, material nature, or it could be something of a spiritual nature. You can say, oh Allah, if you make me a billionaire, right, then I'll fast in Sha'ban, whatever, on such and such a date. Oh Allah, if you allow me to have a vacation, it could be anything, right? Then I'll fast. Or you can say, oh Allah, if you allow me to go for Umrah or Hajj. So regardless, it doesn't matter what the affair is, but if you make this promise, this nadhr, because that's what a nadhr means, it's to promise, right, to make an oath. Okay, so a person does that, and then they say that this day, this time, it's mu'ayyan, ta'yin. So then that becomes obligatory. But other than that, there is no obligation to fast except in the time, or specifically the month of Ramadan. Understand? So that's why the word here, kutiba is what you call al-fi'l al-majhul, which at the moment, I do not know of its equivalent in English grammar, but it's basically if I guess you could call it a passive verb. Does anyone understand what that means? Passive verb is as compared to an active verb. So an active verb is where the subject and the object are mentioned. Right? And the passive is where the subject is not necessarily mentioned. To give an example, kataba, where this verb comes from, kutiba, ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu kutiba alaykum as-siyam. So the word kataba means to write. Kutiba, when you put it, you just see in Arabic, everything is about the i'rab. It's funny that these vowel sounds, the word even is i'rab, from Arab. I'rab from Arab. So the vowel sounds, in Urdu, zabar zir pesh, right? The vowel sounds are the most important aspects when we look at Arabic grammar. So to understand what's being said, the vowel sounds make everything. They make all the difference in the world. So kataba, to take an example, same three root letters, kaf, ta, ba. Kataba means he wrote. In the third person, a masculine form, or because the genders also are used in language. and it's the third person, past tense. If you change it by, you have zabar, 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 right? Kataba. Do you remember those days? Kaf, zabar, ka, ta, zabar, ta, ba, zabar, ba, kataba. All right, now switch that around and put a pesh, zer, and then zabar, and you have kutiba. The meaning changes completely from he wrote to it was written. So if you're following, like the active verb is when subject and object are there. The passive verb, the subject is not mentioned. Who wrote what? We don't know. All we know is something was written. Kutiba. It was written. Make sense? So the word kutiba here doesn't mean that something is literally written. So like it's used that way, this verb in general, kataba yaktubu, which means to write. It's used in another meaning very often in the Quran. Kataba ala nafsihi rahmah, as an example. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He has written for Himself the role of mercy, rahmah. So what does written here mean? It's not an actual, right, script, but it means that it has been established, it has been ordained, if you will. Make sense so far? Okay, so it's used in that way in the Quran. Kataba ala nafsihi rahmah. So the rule of thumb, if you will. Right? It has been ordained that the general rule for Allah regarding Himself is the rule of rahmah, mercy. Here, it's the same form. It doesn't, or the same meaning, rather. It doesn't imply any type of actual script or words that are written. It implies that it has been ordained. So in that case, when we say it has been ordained, what is the implication? The implication is that it is an obligation. Okay? So kutiba alaykum as-siyam, especially when it's used with the word ala. See, I'm giving you some Arabic lessons too at the same time. When it's used, what's called the sila, literally, what are they called? The connectors. It's actually a book they have in English now to just explain this whole aspect of the Arabic language, is the connectors. So you have a verb, and it has to be connected with the subject, right, to make it there's a word for that in English too. English grammar, how many people remember that? Right? So anyhow, the connector is when sometimes the verb, to give its meaning to the object, it requires some type of harf. Okay, like in Arabic, harfs are like fi, ila, in, to, ala, on top, right? So here we have, in the Arabic language, some verbs, when they're used with this, what's called a sila, a certain type of harf, the meaning also, it changes accordingly. So, for instance, kataba ala, if you're paying attention here, kutiba alaykum ala. It's the same word. Kataba ala nafsihi rahmah. Here, kutiba alaykum. When it's used like that, the implication again is that it has been ordained. This is a rule. This is something that has been ordained or established. Got it? So that's why here the word as-siyam is technically just fasting. But most of the exegetes or the tafsir will say that fasting here implies the month of Ramadan, because this is the only type of fasting that is an obligation for us, other than what I've just mentioned, which is a self-imposed obligation, right? Another, or an oath, is self-imposed. So a person says, again, make me a billionaire, if it's something of their worldly affairs or whatever it may be, or even cure me of this disease. Okay, all right, or help me in such and such affair. It doesn't have to be so mundane as to be a billionaire, but it could be anything like that too, like in bad health, I'm in bad health, I need some help, whatever. Oh Allah, if you cure me of this disease, if you restore my health, I will fast on such and such a time or such and such a date. Got it? So that's self-imposed.
Would it be considered a nafal?
No. In that case, it's an obligation. Just like, there's only two types of obligatory fast, or what is fard, is the fast of Ramadan, and this type of, is what's called nadhr, or the oath that you give if you specify it. If you say, I will fast someday, or when I get a chance, or, then it's not the same. But if you specify the time, like, okay, in this month or in this, and again, specifying that, then that becomes obligatory, because you've now given ta'yin. The idea is here too, look at the rest of the ayat, ayam ma'dudat. specified days, counted. Literally, ma'dudat means they are counted. In other words,
So like we've heard that the Prophet Islam used to fast on Mondays and Thursdays.
correct.
So what was that the another? Or
No. This is on his see, this is, okay, now, this is good that you brought up that question because we can diverge a little bit into some very important topics, which is that the word, first of all, sunnah and what it implies, okay? So, and that's important to understand it in terms of what is part of Islamic law or Sharia and the hukam and what is the ruling regarding individuals. So the word sunnah actually means in terms of language, strictly speaking, it is simply a path or a way or a habit, something that a person does continuously or even day in and day out. This is what they do. So, sunna yasunnu sunnatan, it means literally that there's a certain pattern that's established, okay, from anyone or anything. This is a general pattern. Sunnat Allah fil ladhi or fil ladina, right? Like, so Allah even uses the word sunnah in regards to himself, that this is the general pattern, this is what happens normally. So the word sunnah, from a linguistic point of view, it simply means pattern. Now, if you go to different people, different specialists in different fields of Islamic learning, the word sunnah is used differently too. Its implication is different. So for the muhaddithun, those people who study primarily the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which again is simply put, ma udhifa ila nabi ﷺ, anything that is attributed to the Prophet. Now when we say that, it means anything in writing or in word that someone attributes to who? The Prophet. That's their whole academic endeavor. All their concern is to seek out and verify all the things that have been narrated or related to the Prophet ﷺ from the vantage point that it has been related to him. Somebody somewhere out there said that the Prophet ﷺ did this, said this, or as a third part of the definition, meaning that is his qawluhu wa fi'luhu wa taqriruhu, that he said this, did this, or he approved of this. You following me so far?
Mm-hmm.
So these people, their primary concern is to only do what? We're going to dedicate our time into the study of everything that has somehow been related to the Prophet ﷺ. Now, in that definition and in that endeavor, this is a very important thing to understand, that in that definition and in that endeavor, there's nothing implied that they are making a hukam. What do I mean by that? That they are not trying to derive any type of law, per se, from that. Do you understand the difference? They're simply trying to first establish what truly is attributable to the Prophet ﷺ from what is not. That's their primary concern. So what can we say really did, or it happened, or can be related to, and so forth, and to the Prophet ﷺ. Not necessarily extrapolating law from it. Extrapolating law from any text, right, is an entirely different endeavor than just verifying the text. Am I right or wrong? Verifying the text is one thing. That's one academic endeavor. So the muhaddithun would concern themselves with things like the names of narrators, their dates of birth, their death, their travels, and whether people in their time or after them consider them reliable or not. And so there's a whole science to it, right? So they spend all their time in that okay, we want to know exactly how much of this is reliable, how much of it isn't. Now the fuqaha, right, the jurists, what did they do? They would take those texts and endeavor to put them into a context. In other words, to extrapolate and derive law. So if you talk to the muhaddithun, they'll use the word sunnah, but when they use the word sunnah, what do they mean by that? A hadith. Something that is attributed to the Prophet ﷺ. So if they say it's from the sunnah, what do they mean? That there is some text there that mentions that the Prophet ﷺ said this or did this or approved of this. Make sense? Okay. Now the fuqaha, what do? They say, well, the Prophet ﷺ said and did things in different times in different places, and some of this was very particular, or it was contextual, or even sometimes he changed what he did, and there were even things that what they're called the khasa'is or rasul, meaning there were things that only applied to the Prophet ﷺ and did not apply to anyone else. And there's a lot of those actually. So although you may read a text that mentions that the Prophet did such and such a thing, okay, or said such and such a thing, well, more did than say. There's that. You see how delicate all this is. If he said something, oftentimes many scholars will say him saying something is much more important than him doing something, because there may be certain things that he did that only apply to him. But if he said something, then he said it for the benefit of everybody. Okay? Okay, it's a very, these are important points. So extrapolating is one thing. The text is there that mentions that he did certain things. So to give you an example of what I just said, in Sahih Bukhari, which is celebrated as one of the more, popular and sound compilations of hadith, okay, is mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ used to do what's called tawasul, which means that he would fast without breaking fast with iftar. So he wouldn't eat anything, essentially. Right? And so some of the Sahaba got whiff of this, right? They found out that this is what the Prophet does. He doesn't always eat while fasting, so he doesn't always break his fast. They thought maybe it'd be a good idea to do the same thing because their passion was to emanate him as much as possible. And so the Prophet ﷺ told them, see, the whole word here is what told them with his words. He's made it very clear that you cannot do this, and it is not permissible for you, because I am fed, and in other narrations I am given energy from my Lord Allah Azza wa Jal, from where you do not. And then even he just said clearly, lestu kahiyatikum, meaning I'm not like you. Okay, what I can do, you can't do. Right? You're not made of the same. Okay, you're not made of the same. Whatever you want to say, right? You're just not there. So what I do, you shouldn't try to. Right? And he told them specifically. Now that's an example of what I said before. That sometimes what he does, it is not the same as what he says. So he was doing one thing because that was, again, within his capacity, as he said. I get my energy from a source you don't. So I cannot eat, it doesn't bother me. If I don't eat, I'll be fine. If you don't eat, you'll be in trouble. So break your fast, right? So he specifically said to them, that's the whole point, qawl, he mentioned it, told them, because that's his job. If he's the messenger of Allah, which he is, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that his whole purpose is to tubayyina, is to explain everything that was revealed to people, then he has to do what? This is part of aqidah, even like our very essential beliefs as Muslims, that prophets, one of the things that are necessary for them, meaning that we cannot conceive of its opposite. That's what I mean by necessary. We cannot conceive of it. It's not rationally plausible to conceive of the opposite, which is that all prophets must do tabligh. They must convey the message completely. It is not conceivable that they would hide anything from us. That there was something that we needed to know that they would hide from us, okay? And that's why what he says is oftentimes more important than what he does, because there are exceptions. These are called the khasa'is. These are the things that he specifically are meant for him, and they are his exceptions, but not for other people. And there's plenty of examples of that, both in his worship, like this, in his siyam and his fasting, and praying every night. Right? قُمِ اللَّيْلَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا نِصْفَهُ أَوْ انْقُصْ مِنْهُ قَلِيلًا وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. So there's ayat in the Quran where he tells the Prophet to stand in the night, and this is interpreted to be an obligation for him. So praying in night in tahajjud was for the Prophet ﷺ, and for everyone else it was nafil or supererogatory. And also in his personal life too, obviously. There's plenty of examples of that too, that in his personal life also there were certain things that for him it was an exception, for other people it's not permitted, okay? Especially in regards to marriage, as you all know, okay? So based on that, not everything the Prophet does, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, would be considered a sunnah in terms of fiqh. So when we say sunnah and fiqh, so if I say this is sunnah, can anyone tell me what would I intend by that? So you know what fard is, right? Okay. So what is sunnah as opposed to fard?
Recommend, not required.
Not required. It's not a faridah.
Not obligatory.
It's right. So it's not obligatory. You don't have to do it. However, you should do it. And there's another part of the definition, which is that if you leave it continuously, then it becomes sinful. So you don't have to do it like a fault, but you should do it. And if you leave it continuously without excuse, meaning you just do it out of laziness, you don't concern yourself with it because you're just being lazy, right? Then it can become sinful. As opposed to mustahab, you have takhyir. You can do it, you don't have to do it. It's fine. If you do it, you get rewarded. If you don't do it, there's no problem whatsoever. It's a little different. You understand the difference? Because the sunnah is not the same. If you don't do it, and you continuously don't do it out of laziness or whatever it is, you just don't care, then it becomes sinful. So how do we establish that something is a sunnah? See, that's where fiqh comes in. Okay, that's where fiqh comes in, and that's where these jurists have to look at all these narrations and get the context of them and interpret which things that the Prophet ﷺ did become a sunnah and which part of it becomes mustahab or nafil. So although the Prophet ﷺ fasted Mondays and Thursdays, and he fasted also what's called Ayamul Bid, which means are the 13 white nights, which is the 13th, 14th, and 15th of a lunar calendar. These are like the full moons, the period of the full moon. He fasted on those days too. But this is not considered a sunnah in terms of fiqh, something that you should do. And if you don't do it, it can become, after a while, right, if you continue to do it without excuse, it becomes sinful in nature. This is considered mustahab. You can do it or not do it. It's nafil. You have the choice. If you want to do it, it's good. If you don't do it, it's also fine. So there's actually, you understand, there's very delicate points here. Even just the word sunnah, the way people understand it has to be also taken into consideration who's saying that word. So if the muhaddith or the hadith scholar is saying it, they're more than likely referring to a hadith. If a jurist is saying it, they're more likely referring to a ruling, okay? That this is something that you should do, you don't have to do, you should do, and then if you leave it without excuse continuously, it does become sinful in nature, okay?
Can you give an example for that?
What is a sunnah? Like
Yeah,
praying
like
the different types of sunnah salats before, like 2 rakat before fajr.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's an example.
Okay. Okay.
That's an example. And in each aspect of ibadah, even sometimes even in personal issues, like what's often misunderstood, like for instance, marriage itself. What is it in terms of Sharia? So, okay, we said sunnah in terms of who uses the word, right? It has an implication for a muhaddith, for a hadith scholar. The implication is exactly that, it's a hadith. In other words, this is the source. If you want to say it even, this is the nas or the naql, this is the textual evidence, okay? Strictly speaking, that according to a riwayah or a narration, the Prophet ﷺ did this, said this, or approved of this. That doesn't make a ruling. The ruling is when you extrapolate from that text, if you will, okay, a sunnah, in which the faqih or the jurist means by that what? A particular ruling. What is the ruling? Something that you should do. You don't have to do, like a faridah. You should do. If you leave it, it's not sinful, but if you leave it and abandon it completely without excuse, it is sinful. So an example of that, as we said, is 2 rakat before fajr, right? Now, even in terms of personal issues, for instance, zawaj or marriage, like a lot of people don't really understand that it actually is not just a personal issue, but it has a ruling in Islamic law and Sharia. There are implications from the Sharia in regards to marriage. So the reality is that marriage is either fard, sunnah, mustahab, or haram, depending on the person. Okay? It is fard for a person who fears that without marriage they will do haram. Understand? It actually is not like a sunnah. You know how some people say, again, they misuse, oh, the marriage is a sunnah, because there's a hadith, and nikahu min sunnati, that nikah is from my sunnah. Okay? In this case, the hadith means, strictly speaking, a lugha, or the linguistic meaning, which is, this is my what? This is my habit, this is my way, this is what I do, as the Prophet ﷺ meant by that, this is what I do. So, فَمَنْ رَغِبَ مِنْ سُنَّتِي فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي. So who doesn't want to practice my sunnah, then he is not from me. But this is not a fiqh ruling. This is not a hukum. This is not a if you will, a law here. It's just a statement that this is my way. People who don't want to follow my way, meaning if they think that they want to do better, because look at the context of the hadith. The context of the hadith is that certain of the companions, they thought that they wanted to do more than what the Prophet ﷺ did, because the Prophet was an exception. Remember, we just lestu kahayatikum, I'm not like you, which is true. He's an exception. So he can marry women and sleep and eat food and do all those things because he's not affected by all that. But us, we need to do something more. We need to break our nafs, if you will. You know how people say that, right? We need to really, right, do something. So one said, I will never marry in my life. He made an oath. Okay, meaning they promised, I'm never going to get married. The other one said, I'm never going to sleep at night. And the other one said, I will never break my fast, meaning eat during the day. I'm going to fast for the rest of my life. So the Prophet ﷺ heard this and then called them and said that, look, I marry women, I eat, and I sleep sometimes at night too. I don't spend the whole night up. Yes, he did get up for tahajjud, but meaning he didn't just spend, the person said he was never going to go to sleep. You understand? So he said, after that he said that whoever does not follow my way is not from me. Do you understand the point? So it's not per se a law. It's just saying that this is the way that I do things. If you should follow me by doing them as well. Okay? Don't think that by doing more than that or something different than that, that's good for you. Make sense? So, okay, taking that all into consideration, why would the ulama say then, okay, as I mentioned, certain people, it is fard to get married because staying away from haram is an obligation. Okay? And if a person has this fear that if they are not married, then they will commit haram, then it actually becomes obligatory for that person. It's not just a sunnah at that point in time, it's actually what? A faridah, an obligation. Okay? There are certain people that marriage is a sunnah. What we mean by that here is the ruling, meaning something you should do. If you don't do it, you're not sinful, but you should do it, and eventually, the point of the whole, if you remember the definition, if you abandon it completely without excuse, then it becomes sinful. So they define that as a person who has the need for marriage, but they're not afraid of doing haram. You see the difference? They're a human being, they need to be with the opposite gender, but they don't have that fear that I'm going to do something wrong. So it would be wrong for them or sinful for them that when they are capable of getting married, that they don't get married. You understand the point? Once they can, they can be married and they don't do it regardless of having the ability, then it becomes sinful. That's why they call it sunnah. It's mustahab for people who are what? There are some people out there, because human beings are different, just like there's people who need to be married, it's fault. There are also people that it's really not that big of a deal for them. People are different, they have different mizaj, right? A different type of temperament and everything else. So there's certain people that in life it really is not that big deal for them. Meaning they could go on throughout the rest of their life without a partner and it won't bother them. There are people like that. So it's mustahab, meaning it's what? Better. Why? Simply to follow the Prophet. In this case, his practice, meaning the practice of the Prophet. So it's better to do it because there's more reward in challenging yourself with a relationship than just simply living your life single for the rest of, You understand? There's more reward in involving yourself in a relationship and having children and that kind of, all that it implies, than to just say, I don't really need anyone in my life. Why don't I just be single. You understand? Who is it haram for? It is haram for people who have some permanent reason why they should not be married. You understand? Whether it's physical or otherwise. There's a permanent reason that they cannot fulfill the rights of somebody else. So for those people, that would be what? Haram. You would not marry them to someone because, simply put, they would make somebody else miserable, right? And again, it has to be permanent though. So like economic considerations are one thing, but a person can always become rich, for instance. Just as a rich person can always become poor. So that's not permanent. That's temporary, right? So if you say, well, so-and-so doesn't even have a job, well, you can find a job. You understand my point? That's not a permanent. So it has to be something permanent, medically speaking or otherwise, right? Or a permanent, let's say, mental disability that's just not going anywhere and so forth. And you get the picture, right? If it's permanent, there's no way of helping it. Then there's no reason why that person needs to get married. Make sense? Now from that digression, then we go back to the point here, which is more of a fiqh aspect of tafsir, which is that what? Here, obligation, kutiba alaykum al-siyam, the obligation that is implied is, of course, the month of Ramadan. That's why most scholars say that as-siyam here does not mean just fasting, obviously, or hopefully. It means what? The fast of Ramadan. Then, كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ, just as it has been ordained for the people that came before you. And again, most of the exegetes or the tafsir say that this pertains to the people of the book. This is important too, sometimes even when we talk to our children or even talk to people outside of our faith, that there are actually shared in common between us and them, literally every pillar. All of the 5 pillars, every pillar, there is actually a commonality, okay? So as an example, salah is one, right? And zakah is one, and also what? Sawm, fasting. This is not something that we ourselves have done or do, and nobody else has done it before us. But rather, this is a part of the sharia or the way of every prophet since the time of Adam alayhi salam. And every Rasul, meaning a messenger who has a book, right? And an ummah that he leads, every ummah has also what? Some aspect or some vestige. Some ulama even said that Ramadan itself was actually an obligation on all of them. It's just that, of course, things become changed over time. But if you still look today, there's still some type of form of fasting amongst them, right? Like Lent and all these other things, right? You can find it. There is a form of fasting. And even in the Quran, Surah Maryam, right? In the chapter of Maryam, radiallahu ta'ala anha, herself says when she comes with Isa alayhi salam and her people trying to get answers, and what does she say? Inni nadartu lirrahmani sawman falan ukallima al-yawma insiya, that I have vowed for the sake of the most merciful Allah Azza wa Jal, fasting. So today I will not speak to any human being. فَلَنْ أُكَلِّمَ الْيَوْمَ إِنْسِيًّا. So today I will not speak to any human being. Which also shows you that some people may ask the question, well, if all of these 5 pillars we shared in common, were they all the same? Well, the answer is, how are we different, right? So where's the difference? How are we as an ummah different from the people that came before us? The answer is that the concept of fasting is there. The form of fasting is slightly different. So in the case of Maryam, radiallahu ta'ala anha, she said that I will not speak. So for them, fasting included what?
Speech.
That they would not speak as well. During the times of fasting, they would not speak, which is why some ulama say that really, technically also, even though that's not part of our sharia, but it should be somewhat, there should be something there for us too that we should learn from this, which is that it's better to speak as less as possible while we're fasting, because you want to also abstain from the sins of the tongue, carrying gossip and rumors and so forth and so on, and talking about unnecessary things. And usually the only way to do that is just to be quiet. Inevitably, the more we talk, the more it's always going to somehow slip into that arena of unfortunate, sins of the tongue. So the easiest thing to do, if the best thing to do always, as the Prophet ﷺ emphatically told us many times, that the best thing you can do regarding the tongue is just zip it. All right? If it's not necessary to speak, then don't do it. If you haven't been asked, don't say anything. To go, right? Just talk is another subject for another time. But you get the idea. Fasting was there and shared amongst all the people that came before us. So it also shows you that we're not new kids on the block. We're not doing something that's unfamiliar to these people. Okay? You're not doing something that they have no idea where these people came from, this stuff, fasting. And no. You as well were commanded to fast. This was also part of your tradition, if you will. So we're not doing anything new. And that's important because it's even speaking from a personal point of view, before I took Shahada and I wanted to find the truth. That was my goal. And I'm reading about different religions. One of the things that helped me to understand that Islam was true is that there was familiarity. In other words, when I read the Quran, it wasn't so foreign as reading the Bhagavad Gita. Or you understand something, or like a Buddhist text, because there's no familiarity whatsoever. You understand my point? But when I read the Quran and I see the names of the same prophets, even some of the stories are almost exactly the same as the biblical version. Even though I wasn't a Christian at that time, I consider myself agnostic, but still you come from that background, from a Western, from Western civilization is still, technically speaking, has a Christian background. I mean, look at today. No matter how many atheists there are out there, everyone's celebrating what? Easter. And everyone's shutting down. Even the most ardent atheist and agnostic, whatever, nobody's doing, right? The coffee shops are closed, right? All the witches are taking a day off. And so it's still there in their, they call it the Judaic Christian values or civilization, right? So it's there whether they want to admit it or not. So even if I didn't consider myself a Christian, but I'm still acclimated to Christianity, right? So when I read the Quran and I see these things, I find what? Right. There's a familiarity there. It's not so foreign that it's just, okay, what is this? I mean, if I'm going to become Hindu, I might as well start worshiping like Thor or whatever else. Or the Viking gods of, and Buddhism. Although I may personally believe that maybe Buddha could have been, because he came before the Prophet ﷺ, and he could have been a prophet, we don't know for sure. Allah Alam. But over time it just becomes a philosophy. So even here, the Congress had a dispute whether Buddhism should be included in religion as freedom of religion, because it doesn't have all those aspects as most religions do, right? Okay, so it becomes more of a philosophy at times, and that's fine and great, but there's Taoism, which I read about too. There's a lot of philosophies out there, so I want to find something else, okay? You get my point. So why am I saying that? Is that it is a good way of talking to people, to let them know, especially when they are taught that we're the other all the time, continuously, that, wait a second, take a look for a second and tell me if there's really something that different. Now, you may not practice these things, meaning, yeah, you should be fasting. Maybe you're not, but the point is that this is something you know of, and this is something that you have heard of. It is not something new. We're not the new kids in the block. So the other thing here, there was a lot of things, obviously. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. So here, the idea is لَعَلَّ is a type of harf that is used in Arabic to denote a wish that something will occur. Okay? What's called tamanna or tamanni. Okay? So, what does that mean? Like, I remember in Urdu you say kasht, right? If only. Right? So there's two types. La'alla is used for things that are possible to achieve. You understand? Like, if only such and such a thing will happen. So you only use it in Arabic, la'alla, for things that are possible to attain. Now, if it's something that's impossible, you use later. So they use a famous example of a man used in a couplet in poetry. They said that, later shabab ya'ud that if only my youth will return so that I can tell them all of what old age has done to me. You get the right, you get the poem, right? That Layta shababa ya'ud, if only my youth will return so that I can tell them all the bad things that old age has done to me. MashaAllah. But the point is your youth going to return? No. So it's tamanni, you want it to come back, but it's not coming back. So the same word is used in Surah Al-Naba in the very end, for instance, that those who do not believe in Allah on the day of Qiyamah will say, Ya laytani kuntu turaba, if only I could just be what? Dust. But it's not going to happen. All right? So la'alla is used when something is possible. So la'allakum tattaqun would mean that perhaps you will attain taqwa. So the implication by using la'alla is that this is something that is attainable. It is something that is well within your reach and your grasp. Okay? As opposed to layta. Layta shababa ya'ud. If only my youth will return, and then I would tell them all of the bad things that my old age did to me. But youth is not coming back, right? Ya laytani kuntu turaba. If only we would become dust. And it's not going to happen. So when la'alla is used, it is implication that whatever is mentioned after it is well within your reach, as I said. It's attainable and it can be achieved. But the achievement of it and the attainment of it is up to you. It's up to you, right? So, but what should be achieved then? That's the question. If fasting is prescribed for a reason, okay, which is interesting, that goes into, we diverge a lot. That goes into another discussion of Islamic morals and Sharia and fiqh, which is that certain ulama believe that certain things that Allah commands us to do are ta'abbudan, which means that we don't have to necessarily know the reason or the fa'id or the benefit of that commandment. Rather, it is just a test for us, okay, to see, if you will, how obedient we are, which has its own merit and virtue, and they have their own proofs for that. But there are other ulama who vehemently disagree with that and said that is ridiculous. It's not like our Creator is just going to tell us to stand on top or stand on one foot and scratch your head at the same time just to see if He'll do it. فَمَنْ جَاهَدَ فَإِنَّمَا يُجَاهِدُ لِنَفْسِهِ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that whoever makes struggles with themselves, whoever tries, right, and struggles for the sake of Allah, then indeed they struggle and strive for their own souls, their own selves. In other words, Allah, again goes back to our aqidah, Jalla Jalaluhu, is not in need of anything or anyone. Neither is He in need of our obedience. So the famous Hadith Qudsi, that where Allah Jalla Jalaluhu says that if all of you were of one heart, if all of you had the most wicked of hearts, all of you, meaning all of mankind, you were all the most wicked person you can imagine, all of you had the same hearts, all of you were just as corrupted, as wicked as that person, that will not decrease from the grandeur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in any way whatsoever. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't change. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need. Okay, so that also implies that does Allah need our obedience and our good deeds? The answer is no. So that also implies, in turn, if you follow that mode of thinking, that there is always a purpose behind Allah's commandment, whether we are aware of it or not. Okay, and the purpose is not that Allah needs us. The purpose is that we somehow will benefit in some way or some fashion from that commandment. And there are times when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes that clear to us. You understand? And sometimes there's a commandment given, like in this case, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامِ, you are required to fast, and in the end, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. So maybe you will achieve the quality of taqwa. Tattaqun here comes from the word taqwa. So again, we'll go through a little bit of Arabic here, just to understand the concept of taqwa, because oftentimes people will translate the word taqwa as fear, correct? Correct or not, most times that you hear people use the word taqwa, how do they translate it normally? Fear, right? The fear of God. So, which linguistically is not necessary, like the implication may be correct, but linguistically it's not correct, because taqwa is not related to any word in Arabic that denotes fear, like khashya or khawf. And there's many words that you can use to denote fear. Taqwa, doing a little bit of Arabic, we try to do a little bit of everything in this tafsir. But in Arabic, taqwa comes, like most words do, from 3 root letters, waw, qaf, ya. And the form that it derives from is waqa yaqi. And actually very similar in their scale, meaning how you pronounce them and how they're written, to the word wala yali. Wala yali wilaya. Okay? Waqa yaqi wiqaya. You see how they're almost exactly the same in pronunciation? Wala yali wilaya. Waqa yaqi wiqaya. The same type of pronunciation, from which you get the word wali. You know, wali, like wali Allah and all that. Okay, and the word of Allah, the name of Allah Azza wa Jal, al-wali. Okay, from which you also get a word in Arabic, al-waqi or waqin, which occurs in the Quran in several places. Okay, so for instance, lahum adabun fid dunya, wa la'adabul akhirati ashaq, wa ma lahum min Allahi min waq. So this is Surah Ra'd, if my memory serves me. Right? There Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, for these people they will have a punishment here in this world. لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. And again, in the Arabic, there's a lot of it. There's nakira here. So it's almost like, they will get some punishment. A little bit. Not much. But they will be somewhat punished in this world. لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. So they will get some punishment in this world. But then, وَلَعَذَابُ الْآخِرَةِ أَشَقُّ. But what the punishment of the hereafter is much more severe and much more, right, hard. It will be much harder for them. And then وَمَا لَهُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ مِن وَاقٍ. And they will have no protector from Allah. مِن وَاقٍ. The point I'm making here, the word waq here, waw, alif, qaf, it comes from waqa yaqi. So if it means that they will have no protector other than Allah, so what would the verb mean? If protector, waq, is ismul fa'il, is the active participle, as they say in English, right? The one doing the act. What would the act be? To protect. Even in Urdu, wiqayat, right? Have you ever heard that before? Never heard wiqayat? No? It's just simply put wiqaya. Instead of pronouncing the ta marbuta as a ha, you would just use it as a regular ta. Okay? So the idea is here to protect. Okay? The word wiqaya means to what? To protect. And giving you an example of how it's used that way in the Quran. Waq. Qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara. Qu is the verbal command, the amr of wiqaya. Save yourselves, protect yourselves from what? The fire of hell. Okay? So the idea of taqwa, it comes from to protect or to ward something off that is harmful. So the idea of taqwa is tilka hududullah, these are the limits of Allah, fala ta'duha, don't go beyond them. So you have these limits, and wiqaya or taqwa coming from wiqaya means to protect yourself from those limits. It's kind of like, on the highway they have those guardrails so that you don't go off into the mountains. Right, especially on 76, right? You don't go off and to almost sure death, illa mashallah, except if Allah wants you not to die, it's not your time, mashallah, that's different, but that's the idea. You have a road you're traveling down, you don't want to veer off the road because that's dangerous. So that's taqwa. Taqwa is your consciousness of those limits, and you're trying to protect yourself.
It's like being vigilant?
Yes, like you can say all those things, right? Whatever implies the fact that you are trying to be aware of and protect yourself from those limits that Allah has set. Now the interesting thing here is that, this opens up the door of a lot of discussions. Recently, I was just watching someone on a video, talking about from their perspective and different types of things that they understand of human nature, that happiness is not the first goal of the human brain. The human brain is wired, for instance, for first and foremost self-preservation, and happiness is a secondary consideration, according to some. You understand my point? And they're saying that happiness is not the first thing that you consider. The first thing you consider is self-preservation, which is interesting because historically our shuyukh have said that the nafs, okay, will be usually the nafs, the self. The first thing it's concerned about is the same thing, self-preservation. Interesting, right? That they came up to that conclusion a long time ago. That the first thing the nafs wants is what? Self-preservation. Whatever it feels will help it to grow, all right, or to, become stronger. And that usually is relegated primarily to, first and foremost, the very physical aspect of our being, right? So in the next surah, Surah Ali Imran, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about that, حُبِّبَ إِلَى النَّاسِ حُبُّ الشَّهَوَاتِ, right? That human beings, they have been made intrinsically, in other words, by Allah, to love their desires. Because without desires, we wouldn't do any of these things. Even self-preservation would not look that appealing. So with animals, they have instincts, right? And so they just do it out of instinct. With us, we do it out of desire. If Allah had not placed those desires within us, it probably would be, it's kind of like the discussion we had before. If someone had no need for marriage, we would have to compel them, right? Otherwise, why would they go through the bother? Easier just to be single, right? At least it seems that way, all right? But Allah has put into us this desire, and even some ulama say that this is not just desire, they even go to the extent of terming it durura. Durura in Arabic means, the same word muttar in the Quran is used, someone who's compelled. So the idea of being compelled is that you do not choose that for yourself. It is something that you are forced to do. So they say things like eating and getting married, procreating, and having money, for instance, like having some type of wealth, are not necessarily things that we want to do per se, but we are compelled. How are we compelled? That is instilled in us. حُبِّبَ إِلَى النَّاسِ. It is something divinely instilled in us that we find no other way but to do what? But to do that. Almost similar to an instinct of an animal. When the time comes for an animal to do these things, they don't have a choice, right? And when it's time to build a house, it's time to do what? It's time to make the nest. When it's time to find a partner, it's time to find a partner. When it's time to feed themselves and the children, it's time to feed them. So they do it. When it's time to eat, when it's time to defend them, whatever instinct they have is all there for their self-preservation. Correct or not?
Yes.
Okay? So human beings are no different in that respect. That we are also the same. We are muttar. We have dururat, right? We have dururiyat and all these other words we need. We have things that we also must. We are compelled to do these things. But the difference is what? Between us and an animal.
You do have this
Impulse control.
angelic
Right. We have angelic features. And one of them too, by the way, is the aql, is the intellect. Because the role of the intellect is to help us to understand that there is something beyond all this and that there are consequences for the things that we do. That's the difference. So even though we have to do these things, but we also have a choice on how we do it. Right? We have a choice. So what is taqwa? Taqwa then, so why is fasting, first of all, what do we fast from? Think about it. What did we just say? We fast from food, marital relations. These have to do directly with our what? What we just talked about. Self-preservation and dururiyat. What our nafs is, physically speaking, is compelled to do. So we're taught to abstain from those things for a certain period of time so that we train ourselves, that we don't just react to these needs, but we learn how to keep them within what? Limits. That's called taqwa.
It seems though that humans, as opposed to animals, a lot of the things we do are not necessarily for self-preservation, but for desire, right? So why do humans involve themselves in self-destructive behavior all the time?
Right. This is where I didn't want to mention that part. Go ahead. Yeah.
So, for example, when you eat, people knowingly know they're eating bad food. That
Right.
has nothing, right? It's more so a desire that seems to be the primary
Right.
drive in a lot of the things we do.
ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. This is where we become worse than even animals. You understand? Because an animal does it for that reason only. Self-preservation and Okay, but even that has an aspect of self-preservation because it has to do with pleasure and pain, correct? So part of self-preservation is to rack up as much pleasure as possible, right? And avoid the pain, which is what animals will do as well. Will an animal deliberately put itself into harm's way? No, right? I just read recently that sharks are afraid of someone. They're afraid of the killer whales, right? So if they see them around or whatever, since they're around, they just go somewhere else. They're not complete fools, right? They have an idea that the pleasure and pain is. We talked about, I think, this briefly too. Even when it comes to morality, some people would say that that's the bottom line of morality. An intelligent person does what? Right? Tries to acquire pleasure and avoid pain. Okay? So when the nafs is not trained, it can get to that extreme. Mm-hmm. But that's when, again, the aql has not overcome what? The nafs, because even what it knows, it doesn't care about anymore. That's the scary part, that a human being can become worse than an animal in that sense, is that it knows, the aql will tell you that, yeah, eating this food on a continuous basis is not good for me, no matter how much it may taste wonderful, okay? But when the nafs has gone so out of control, then what happens? The aql now becomes what? Completely diminished. And that's the whole point of all of this, is you're trying to achieve nur through wahi. That's why the next, or coming up, that we say that the month of Ramadan, or Allah Azza wa Jal says the month of Ramadan is the month in which the Quran was revealed. Hudan lin-nas. It guides people from exactly these perils, where the intellect can become stronger than the nafs, right? And that the nur and the light and guidance of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu will now be there within you to help you navigate through issues like this. When have my nafs gone so far out of control that I'm not even using common sense anymore? Okay, you understand? I'm not even using common sense. I'm not even just doing what is necessary in terms of, like you said, like a self-preservation. Like, okay, I eat because I need to, but rather I eat because I want to. So if I had that craving, I had that itch, that I'm going to the refrigerator and right, like an addict, and I do what I got to do, right? And this could be used. You can just take that one example and go all the way down with all of our shahawat and all of our dururiyat, those things which we are naturally compelled to do. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala trains us by what's called Ramadan, which is interesting because Ramadan is actually the root word of Ramada or Ramida Yarmadu, which means literally to scorch something, to burn something up. So in Arabic you can say Ramidat qadamuhu, that their foot was burned on the scorching sands. All right, especially the sands of the desert, or even here, if you go to New Jersey, for instance, in the summertime, and you try to walk in the middle of the day on the shore without slippers on, right? What'll happen? You'll burn your soles of your feet. Okay, so the desert of Hijaz, or the Arabian Peninsula, is much more intense. Maybe some of you have visited or lived there, but you know what I'm talking about, right? So when the Arab said Ramida, it means literally that something that is scorched by the burning sands of the desert. So Ramadan is the root of that. So what's the implication? That through fasting, you literally are burning up those desires, if you will. Okay? You're training yourself to kind of like, just burn it out of your system, to where now, for a whole month, you get used to the idea of not reacting, not listening to the nafs and what it compels you to do. You have to eat, you have to do this, you have to do that. Okay? And that's why it's called Ramadan. All right? It's the training from Allah Azza wa Jal for the ummah to get used to this idea that we're not the type of people that just react without thought, without guidance. Hudan lin-nas. But we're like other people in that regard. That's when I told you, like when my little daughter asked me, so we're not that different from all these other people. I said, we are not, but we are. Yeah, we're humans. We have the same desires. We're no different in that respect. But we're different in this respect, that we should be at least trying to learn how to control them and put them within their bounds. That's the whole point of taqwa. Taqwa is to put them within their bounds. Okay? And that's what technically fasting is for. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. And the idea there too is that without that taqwa, you cannot receive what the Quran, أُنزِلَ فِيهِ الْقُرْآنُ هُدًى لِلنَّاسِ, the first part of it, guidance for human beings. Because if your nafs gets so out of control, then you will not follow even the dictates of the intellect. Right? It's not like an alcoholic or a drug addict doesn't know that these things are harming them. I think that in their mind, rationally, they can put 2 + 2 = 4, right? They can come to that rational conclusion that drinking alcohol and being a drug addict is not too good, ultimately, right? Ultimately, I will hurt myself, I will hurt the people I love, I will hurt even total strangers. Like, there's more people killed in this country than the whole of the Vietnam War in drunk driving accidents, right? And if a person gets involved in even stronger chemical addictions, then they know that they're going to lose everything, family, dignity, everything they have, right? Nobody would say that they don't know that. So rationally in their mind, I think it clicks, but the nafs has gone so out of control that they just simply don't care. So that's why if you go to the word huda, which is mentioned in the next ayah, and we go all the way back to the beginning of Baqarah, what does it say? Huda lil muttaqeen. You have to have some training to allow the dictates of the intellect and of guidance to overcome the dictates of what? The nafs, the immediate, right? The immediate gratification and the immediate result and all of that good stuff, which is what we call al-hayat ad-dunya. That's what we call the immediate. It's literally could be. I mean, one of the words that could be related to dunya is dunu, which means to be close, which means immediate. It's here and now, as opposed to akhirah, which is something that comes later. So now we find ourselves in that month where, mashallah, for the most part, we are very thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that most Muslims, no matter what kind of person they are before Ramadan, mashallah, in Ramadan, we find that everyone has this zeal, right, and this incredible capacity to fast for 30 days or 29, right? You talk to some people and your co-workers or colleagues and they'll ask you, like, how do you do that? Right? How is that even humanly possible? Right? How could you do that for that long? This is some type of wonderment, like, these guys are crazy. Again, we're always crazy, right? These guys are out of their minds. For 29, 30 days, they actually go through all of that. And I say, mashallah, yeah, even the worst of us, even the sharabi, right? For 30, 29 days, we'll put it away, we'll put it in the shelf, and be as pious as they possibly can, at least until iftar, right? They'll do that much, like, okay, at least during the day, mashallah, we'll be okay. But in some ways, we should be thankful to Allah for that. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given that much, because this is also part of the barakah of Ramadan. As the Prophet said, Sufidat the shayateen are tied up, meaning they're not there anymore, because that's the part also that does play in, which they're not cognizant of, is that what? It's not just your nafs, there's an unseen element there that's prodding your nafs to fall to that weakness and not to think. Right? And what does he threaten you with? Right? He threatens you with faqr. And faqr is not just poverty in the literal sense. Okay? Faqr is literally like you're missing out on something. So what would shaitan tell your nafs when all these desires come up? See, if you don't do this, you're never going to have this fun. You're never going to taste it again. You're never going to know what it's like. Come on. What's wrong with you? Allah's Ghafur Rahim. Just do this. Trust me. I'm telling you. Ya'idukum literally means he promises you that, if you're missing out on something, there's something you're going to, because faqr literally means that you have need. You have some need for something. So fulfilling a desire is also a type of what? Shaitan's got you all promises, makes all those promises to you. Okay, do this, right? So we have that aspect there that we acknowledge as Muslims. When the shayateen are not there, then oftentimes what happens is a person is able to think for themselves and they're not being prodded on by, if you have a bad friend who's always getting you into trouble, and you take them away, And you may actually be able to think for a second and say, I really don't want to do that again. The friend comes back again and says, oh, what's wrong with you? You're trying to be good. Come on, let's go out. Let's go back to the old, what's wrong? Why? What are you? So that's what it's like. A lot of the people have bad habits, but bad habits are also encouraged by, of course, our open enemy. And so when that friend is not there anymore, you may actually have a chance to do something good, at least some effort, right? So that's what it's like when the shayateen are chained up. Also, for many people now, they don't have that extra additional struggle with their nafs on top of that with shaitan also. Now, mashallah, we also live in an environment, obviously, where it's probably more difficult because of the fact that most of the people around us do not share those same sentiments and are not fasting even, or, right, could care less about taqwa for that matter, even from a philosophical point of view, right? That's really not in their list of concerns. Being aware of Allah's limits, that's the least of their concerns. Their concern is to do this: maximize pleasure, minimize pain. So when they see you going through these things, they may not appreciate it. They're saying, okay, again, crazy people. What is the point of all this? So that does unfortunately demoralize us as well. We're only human. Again, it's just the same as having the shaitan around again to say, hey, look out what you're missing out on. Wouldn't you want to be doing this right now? So that's why what I mean to say by this is that there are higher aspects of taqwa and of fasting, which again, if you want to read a book, mashallah, the shuyukh will go through it. They even go so far to say is like there's a physical fasting and there's an inward fasting. The physical fasting is the obvious imsak. It is to abstain from the things that we are supposed to abstain from by Islamic law. The inward is to try and get the heart to abstain from anything other than Allah. Okay? To get to the point where nothing matters except the remembrance of Allah. And that's, to speak of things like that when we're in this type of environment, I'm not saying that you can't attain it. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. It is possible, but it is a very, very, very difficult feat. Okay? It's like finding a jungle in the desert. Can't expect much, right? So you kind of have to balance yourself in the sense that if we can just do the basic things that we're supposed to do, in fasting, considering the environment and the fact that people have to, mashallah, go to work in the morning and it's summertime, so we should be happy with whatever little we are able to do and ask Allah to put barakah in it. Okay? There's a lot of people who like to it's the first time I went to Chicago when I moved to Chicago, and all these people in Chicago, mashallah, their tarawih, they're like super, like 2 hours long, right? And this is again, summertime fasting. And people have to go to work at 6 or 5, sometimes 5, Chicago traffic too, sometimes 5 o'clock in the morning. And people are praying, at least masajid praying 2 hours long. And I said, I missed they used to make jokes about them. They call them ya'maluna ta'malun. The hufad, the hafiz al-Quran that used to recite so quickly that the only thing you understood at the end was ta'alamun or ya'lamun, just right? Everything else is and at the very end, ta'amalun, ya'malun, right? 30 minutes, 45 minutes, tarawih flat, with witr and everything, right? And you're gone, you're done, you say, mashallah. And now it's 2 hours long, and one masjid without any names, they did 8 rakat, they were doing 20, after 8 rakat, they did 2.5 hour long fundraising. Oh, Allah. And then after that, you have 12 more rakat as it come, mashallah. I know that everyone feels that they're got that strength, but sometimes you have to be realistic as well, right? You don't want to push yourself, and that's the key to this. We talk about the nafs, and we talked about its needs, but the nafs also has a secret, which means that in Islam, we're not supposed to kill the nafs, crush the nafs. We're supposed to control it. There's a big difference between the two. If Allah, we're not like other traditions in that sense. We'll talk about this another time when I'll open up for questions. But the physical is not necessarily in and of itself bad. Okay, even the sensual pleasures that Allah provides in this dunya. Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, who I don't think anyone in the ummah, we can argue about a lot of things about him, but I don't think anyone in the ummah will argue that he's not a Sufi, right? You understand? I don't think anyone with half a brain would say that, right? I mean, that's obvious. And even he says, for instance, to give you an example, because that's considered to be a spiritual person, right? That every sensual pleasure and pain in the dunya is like an hors d'oeuvre. In other words, it's a small taste of what will happen in the hereafter, okay? So that's why the Prophet ﷺ even said, Inna Allah la yarda. Indeed, Allah is pleased. From rida, radiyallahu anhum, the same word. Allah is pleased. Now, he's pleased with the Sahaba after great sacrifice, right? But here in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah is indeed pleased, the same word, with the servant who, when they eat something, aklatan, they eat something, and then they say, Alhamdulillah. There's a simple morsel, a piece of food, and they say, what? Alhamdulillah. After all, that physical, very physical, mundane thing, if you took 1 grain of rice, okay, now, that 1 grain of rice, where did it come from? Okay, go back to the rice paddies. Go back to everything that is needed for that, the rain, the climate, the earth, the soil, the people who actually put those seeds and then harvested that rice and then sold it in the market, then transported it here, then you worked, got a paycheck, brought that rice, took it home, cooked it. How much effort was there behind 1 grain of rice? How much?
I'd imagine.
A lot. That's why if we think that the market price is really the true value of it, if we were really to put all these things in consideration and think about what its true value is, you say, subhanAllah, how could we put a price on it? So we are taught to actually appreciate and recognize a very mundane, simple, sensual thing like a piece of food. Something that simple. So we're not saying that all of that is just forget all that and become, like the Buddhists say, you achieve nirvana, okay, or true happiness when you remove yourself from what? All material things. Period. Right? There should be no materialism, no attachment to any physical material thing, which they're right in one way and wrong in another. Even the Prophet ﷺ said, لَيْسَ الْغِنَى بِكَثَّةِ الْعَرَضِ وَلَكِنَّ الْغِنَى غِنَى النَّفْسِ. That true contentment is not with having an abundance of things, but true contentment is to be content in your heart, right, in your nafs, literally. So they're right in that respect that true happiness doesn't lie in material things. But also they're wrong in a sense that you cannot abandon all material things just for the sake of achieving happiness.
So there has to be moderation.
There has to be moderation. Also, that's a deep concept too, the idea of happiness, like we said before. I mean, what is it and why and so forth and so on. Like, let's put it this way. You can have an atheist who's happy, a Sikh who's happy, a Buddhist who's happy, a Muslim who's happy, and a Christian who's happy. They're all happy. So can we premise the truth on who's happy? You understand? But they're all happy. So if the truth is only what makes you happy, the way that all these people are happy. So you can't premise the truth on what makes you happy. Sometimes also the greatest of us, even the Prophet ﷺ, felt pain, felt sorrow, felt, right? All of these human emotions. So it's not always about just being happy all the time. Okay? It's about going through the gauntlet of life, the ups and the downs. Okay? And this is also talked about in the Quran, right? What does sabr mean? وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ مَسَّتْهُمُ الضَّرَّاءُ وَالسَّرَّاءُ. Bad things happen to them, good things happen to them. They go through life, but they're patient. That's what truth is all about. It's being a human, going through it. So part of being human is that, like you said, it's a balance. It's not all about leaving everything material and just being in this cloud somewhere in nirvana, like, oh, nothing bothers me because I don't care about anything. Which is, and you can take that further too. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to go too far, but that's also why you see in recent times there's been a lot of violence at the hands of certain Buddhist sects. It's a very easy thing to understand why it can happen. Why? Because if they say that material pleasure and pain is all an illusion of the mind, so what would you concur from that? That other people's suffering too does not what? Does not matter. You understand? So as Muslims, if we acknowledge blessings of Allah, even in mundane physical things. And we acknowledge pleasure and pain, okay? To the point that the Prophet ﷺ said, Hatta shawka, even a thorn prick expiates your sins, right? So even something as small as that, we acknowledge all of it. So then we would also have a softer heart, because why? We will acknowledge when we are causing somebody or something else pain, to the point that the Prophet ﷺ even said that a woman who was, a woman of the night, let's put it that way politely, right? She was forgiven for doing what? Feeding a dog. Where a woman who fasted all day and prayed all night was sent to hell for starving a cat that she owned. And so we don't just say, oh, it's just the world, who cares? No, you caused this cat, it's not even a human, right, for that matter, this small, helpless creature, you caused it inconvenience. You caused it harm. So now you have to pay for it. Right? You see what I'm saying? So we're not that extreme. We're just saying that we need to get to the point where we can control these things, not get rid of them. So why am I saying that is because, coming back to the point of the environment we live in, if we pressure ourselves so much that we expect ourselves to be like that, like we just have no desires, we don't get tired, we don't have the need to eat or sleep or anything, we're just going to pray all night long, okay? And then go to work tomorrow at 6 or 5 o'clock, and none of that will bother us. We'll be okay, we'll be fine. It won't work. You understand? You're not even expected to do that. Okay, so the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, used to shorten his prayers when he heard, for instance, that there was a child in the room and a child was crying and things. So he was very conscious. In fact, some hadith mentioned that the angriest the Prophet ever got, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was when he was told about an imam of a certain masjid that used to lead the prayer too long, and people would become, upset, and some people would get late for their responsibilities. They said he never got as upset as he did that time. That this person, you may be in that mood, that's wonderful, right? But again, you're causing other people what? Inconvenience and harm. So that's not part of the deal. You're not supposed to do that. So what I'm saying is, like, be careful too also when we have all that josh, mashallah, and we want to pray 2-hour long taraweehs and witr, and again, it's going to be late, right? Isha salah will be like who knows what. And then with all of this, and then tomorrow again, most people have to leave very early to go to work. And if you want to wake up for sahur, also, subhanallah, so you would get 2 hours of sleep, if that. And not everyone has the luxury to call off during the day, do they? Right? Some people can do that. Say, it doesn't matter, I'll stay up all night because I don't have to work tomorrow morning, so I'll just sleep until the dhuhr. You know how in Dubai, in those countries, that's what happens. Everything shuts down and no business is done until the evening, right? No store is open, no business, well, yeah, but in the good old United States of America, the boss wants you to be there at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock, and they could care less whether you're fasting or praying all night or whatever it is. So there's no excuse you're going to be able to give, like, hey, can I come in later? And it doesn't work, does it? So we regulate your taqwa, let's put it that way. Regulate your practices so that they don't become overbearing. That's why it's important always to understand these certain things, like what is exactly needed of you in terms of just bare bone sharia. And even if you want to do over and above the call of duty, you should still seek advice and guidance from someone, because you don't always know whether that's going to be the breaking point for you. And we'll leave it at that and open up for questions. Breaking point means, of course, like the Prophet said, that when you shed, nobody is extreme in their practice of their deen except illa ghalabahu, except the deen will overcome them. And what is meant by that is that they will eventually stop everything. Okay? They'll become so extreme in the things they do that eventually they'll get so tired that they'll do what? They'll leave everything. Say, I can't take any of this anymore. It's not practical. So slow but sure wins the day. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, slow but sure. Fast in Ramadan, be balanced. Okay, so any questions, inshallah? None? Inshallah.
Is every emulation of the Prophet, other than what he mentioned not to do, considered a sunnah? Like if there are very personal things he did, foods he avoided, that he wouldn't come out necessarily and say.
Right.
But if you copy that, is that considered a sunnah?
It's a very good question. So this goes back to the discussion we had before about the term sunnah and what it means, right? So I told you two things, which is that one is the sunnah, when the muhaddithun of the scholars of hadith referred to it, it means a hadith, literally, not necessarily a ruling. When the fuqaha refer to it, they mean a ruling, okay? Now, there's another term too that's used as sunnah, and these are for what they call usuliyun. Usuliyun are those people who are fuqaha, they're jurists, but their primary concern is the actual text, okay, and how the methodology, what you call the madhab, how we derive law from that text. According to them, there are two types of sunnah, because the sunnah, as they define it, is ma wadaba alayhi nabiyyu sallallahu alayhi wa sallam ashabu, whatever the Prophet did assiduously, meaning continuously, and all of his companions, all right? So anything, whatever, right? Whatever it is that he used to do. But then they divided it into two parts. There's one that they call Sunan al-Huda and Sunan al-Zawa'id. Sunan al-Huda are those things that the Prophet used to do all the time that form law, like 2 rak'ah before Fajr. Sunan al-Zawa'id are those things that the Prophet did as habit that don't form law, like eating particular foods, even wearing certain types of clothing, okay? Or, you understand? These things actually technically don't form law unless there's a reason for it to form law, meaning that the Prophet ﷺ explicitly stated, okay, something, or told us something about that would make it law. Other than that, it doesn't form. The best that the best implication it has in law is that it's mustahab. It is a good thing to do if you do it on this out of the love of the Prophet ﷺ, meaning that I just love the Prophet ﷺ so much that I want to eat this particular food or wear this turban or whatever. You understand? Like, it's just out of love. It's still only what? Still only mustahab. It's not the sunnah that we described, which means that you should do it, and if you don't do it without excuse, it becomes sinful. So a person cannot wear a turban their whole life, and it won't imply what? Won't imply anything. You understand my point? Does it make sense? So that's a very important point, because that's often misunderstood by many people too. So that not every personal thing that the Prophet, even to the point that some even said, like an tibb al-nabawi, the prophetic medicine, right? It's interesting that some ulama, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, rahimahullah ta'ala, who wrote that book, even mentioned certain things like eating dates. Dates are fine, but they're not necessarily good for people who live in colder climates. He actually mentioned that. Okay, so I mean, you have to, like when the Prophet ﷺ advised the person to take honey, and 3 times the person said it's not working, and he said that your stomach lied. What does that mean? You see, some people take that to mean that, like, you know, it's simple. His reaction to the honey is what's the problem, it's not the honey itself. So what would that imply? Medically speaking, is honey good for that person? Perhaps not. Because you understand, their makeup, there's other hadith that have become popular recently. Some people have put it in their websites, as again go unnamed, about beef, right? That it's laban, or it's meaning it's halib, its milk is a cure and its meat is a poison. Now, without getting the discussion about the hadith itself, like how strong is it, but even that hadith, see, they don't go further to explain that even the scholars in the past, Ibn Hajar al-Haytami rahimahullah ta'ala, said about this hadith that this is particular to a particular climate and people, meaning for the Arabs, drinking cow milk was good, eating its meat was not. But if you lived in Europe where beef is popular, you see what I'm trying to say? That's your staple diet, and your whole makeup and your body system. You know, as many of you are doctors, you know this, right? That our whole, even just our diet and even our ancestors' diet and climate and all of that contribute to the way our body reacts to a particular thing, like beef or like dates or anything else. So that is not, you take those things into consideration before you say that this is a sunnah from what perspective? A fifth perspective, meaning that now you have to do this. And if you don't do it without excuse, you become sinful. We'll say, no, this is from Sunnah al-Zawa'id, meaning these are the things that the Prophet ﷺ may have done out of his own personal habit, all right? But you don't have to do them. But I have to add to that too, though, as a side note. that part of the requirements of Iman is that we love the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So even if you don't do something, but if the Prophet did it, you can't look down on it. There's a difference, right? Like, I don't do it because of whatever reason, right? I just don't like whatever, right? Personally. I shouldn't even say don't like, but it's just not befitting, or it's not appropriate for me, whatever. But to look down on it is a different thing, okay? So some people, at one time, they were disgusted when they heard that the Prophet ﷺ was like squash.
The foods.
Right. Because they considered it to be something like, what's that? All right. And, at that time, Imam Abu Yusuf, rahimahullah ta'ala, talked to Harun Rashid, as happened in his majlis, and said, punish this person. Not because you don't have to eat it. You don't have to like it, meaning personally you don't want it, but you shouldn't look at this like this face, like, how could he eat something like that? Right? Like, ugh. If the Prophet loved it, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then out of love for him, you also should love it, even if it's against your personal tabi'ah and your own personal, right, what I like and don't like. You don't have to eat it, that's fine. But don't look down on it and think, oh my God, how did he, eat that? Does it make sense? But that's the categorization, basically. There's certain things that he did that do form law, and there's other things that he did that do not form law. And one has to be aware of that before they just make, again, conclusions. Like, this hadith said that the Prophet ﷺ did this, or...
So which type of sunnah is having a beard?
Right. That's another...
Because I've talked to people who believe that not having a beard is haram.
Right. That's because it's something that the Prophet ﷺ said explicitly. That's why they derived that ruling. But that's also, it depends on who you talk to. They were probably more than likely anyhow. Yeah, because that's a little different. That wasn't something that he just did. It's something he actually said something about. So that would be, that's when we look at law, that's what we do. We're not just looking at just a simple, right? We have to look at every aspect of it. Okay, how and what was going on, and when he said something as opposed to just doing something. And that would be the difference in that particular case. So there are things too that if the Prophet said it, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it also becomes obligatory if he did say it, right? And as a commandment, as an example, subhanAllah, I'm trying to think of something, but come inshallah. But there are certain things that the Prophet did emphasize that would become, and that's also, again, this is part of usul fiqh. When I said usuliyun, these are the people that study these texts and understand how to derive these rulings. Because there's certain things that the Prophet ﷺ said to do, but they're not obligatory, they're mustahab. Like, the famous hadith of the fly falling into your drink? Have you ever heard this one? So the Prophet ﷺ said, if the fly falls in your drink, he said there's a disease in one wing and a cure in the other. So you should dip it into the drink again before you throw it out, right? So the scholars have mentioned, though, this is not an obligation, even though the Prophet commanded you. Do you understand their point? Like, he said do it, but they say it's not an obligation, it's mustahab. If you do it, it's good. If you don't do it, also there's no sin. Implication being, again, in Islamic law, we're not talking about the dunyawi, we're not talking about worldly benefits, we're talking about punishment in the hereafter, right? So if you don't do it, you're not going to be punished for it in the hereafter. But if you do it, Allahu Alam, I remember reading stuff like, I don't know how valid that is, but I remember people saying that that's true, that they did some kind of research about and again, that was years ago, so I don't remember the exact details, but there is actually something to it, that if you dip the fly into the, but it has nothing to do with your akhirah, though. You understand what I'm saying? It's not like a sin from that perspective if you don't do it.
But if your intention is to follow the Prophet, then you might get a reward for it, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Same thing with this. If you wear a turban, you don't have to, for a male, right? You don't have to do that. But if you do it just because, again, it's something that the Prophet ﷺ did, and I just love the Prophet so much that I want to look exactly like him, all right, that's you can be rewarded for that. Even that sometimes could be contextual too, because there are times when certain environments and things go on that might not be advisable. That, you see, everything is considered in circumstance. In other words, what is mustahab is only mustahab. If in another circumstance you probably shouldn't do it, Why? Because by doing that, for instance, wearing a turban is a good thing if you want to do it for the love of the Prophet ﷺ, but if you do it in a certain case where it actually can get you into trouble, that's not advisable. You understand? Same thing goes with that. I don't want to get detailed in that, but if you have a job that requires certain things, you have to look at the whole picture, right? This job requires this. Now, earning a living for a person who has the responsibility to provide is a farida, it's fard. Do you understand my point? So a fard is, technically speaking, more important than a wajib in the Hanafi fiqh at least, or a sunnah. So to give a simple example, you're at work, you have to pray dhuhr. There's 4 rakat sunnah before and 2 after, right? But what if you don't have the time? What do? So you make your fard, that's it. You fulfill your fard, you go back to work, because working is what? It's an obligation. The sunnah is sunnah. Not to say it's less than, but at that point in time, you have to be smart enough to make the 2 out. Like if I'm going to get fired, right, and I come in and I make the excuse, well, I'm praying. Again, boss doesn't care about any of that. Like you're praying or whatever, that's your own business. You understand? So you have to be smart enough to know the difference. There's certain things that, you take it into consideration, the context, of course. Does it make sense? Make it easy. Anything else? No? Thank you. Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for coming.